Welcome to another episode of the Recovering Cinderella podcast. Real stories of hope, inspiration, and advice from women who have made it through divorce for women going through it. My name is Keri Olson. I am also known as Recovering Cinderella. I am a master certified life coach specializing in empowering women to move forward after their divorce and build lives that they love. Today, we are talking to Melody from Minnesota, and she's going to share her story of divorce, recovery, and how she's built an amazing new life that she didn't even think was possible many years ago. So welcome, Melody. Thank you for being here to share your story. Why don't you start off by telling me a little bit about your marriage and how long you were married, and tell me your story.
Sure. Well, it's good to see you, Keri. Let's see. So I was married to the baddest boy of my high school. I was the good girl, the good Jesus girl, and he was the exciting bad boy. And so obviously opposites attract at that age. So we dated my senior year in high school, both graduated. He joined the Air Force, and I went to college for a year, and then we got married. So we were 19 when we got married. We were married almost 7 years and divorced, and we did not have children.
So you got married very, very young.
Very, very incredibly, don't ever do it young. Yes.
Were you high school sweethearts?
Not really, no. But I'm from a small town, very small town, actually, in a rural area. And so we knew each other all through high school. We lived, or not high school, junior high, grade school. We lived within, like 6 blocks of each other. His parents knew my parents, but so it wasn't like we didn't know each other. But it wasn't until the end of my senior year, maybe like the last 6 weeks of school, that we dated, and then through the summer.
So you got married pretty quickly.
Yeah, so we dated, and then he went to basic training in Texas and with the Air Force, and then was stationed in Missouri. And I went away to college for that year, and then came back. We got married in August and started a life there.
So tell me a little bit about, was the marriage always good? When did it turn bad? What happened?
Oh gosh. Well, I think if he was sitting here with me, we would probably say the same thing. Like, it was this really nice idea of I think we attracted each other because the good points to each other were the things that we were missing in each other, in ourselves. He had lost a parent very, very young, and my mother just loved him. And so I think that was very attractive. And I loved that he was wild and unencumbered with the worries I had growing up. I grew up in a very religious home. He had a faith, but not that same religious tines. And so he was super fun and impulsive, and I was a thinker. And so I think he wanted some of the home life that was very traditional, but he also wanted those wild pieces, and I wanted the wild pieces and a traditional home life. And that was great for a while, but you can only live that way for so long, and you start to butt heads. And so I'd say within the first, probably, I think we'd both say within this first 6 months, I was like, shoot, I should have probably lived together and not gotten married.
So at what point did things start to, or did you realize that you guys just weren't working? Was there a certain point?
Well, here's the thing. When you're that young, like, you're living paycheck to paycheck. And while the military did pay our rent, we lived off base for quite a while. And we had medical insurance, which of course now is so huge. Those things were taken care of, but money was tight. Like, we were going to school, and she needed a car, and his job pulled him away from home for, what was it, 3 or 4 days and nights at a time, and then he'd be home, and then he was gone. And I was waitressing. So anybody in college who waitresses knows that you're waitressing every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, right? So he was home So I told you he was, kind of a wild child. So then Friday and Saturday nights, he was going out with the guys from his unit. Most of them were not married. Those that were married were at home with a wife and children. That was why they had gotten married. They had children on the way. So we, I'm waitressing every Friday and Saturday night, and he's going out with the buddies to the bar and meeting college girls and doing what most, young men would be doing, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. So pretty quickly, it was obvious that we were not on the same wavelength about. I didn't mind him going out. I minded him behavior when he would come home and the money, but I think most of it was just kind of the attitude that came with that it was all okay.
So was there a certain point that you just knew that this was not going to work out? Or did it just come as a...
Well, so we were together. So let me think about this a minute. We were together 5 years, then we actually separated. I think we had kind of serial separations, right? I think a lot of people talk about that, where you're together, you separate, you miss each other. So there's that honeymoon period, you get back together, but all the issues are still there. We did try counseling, and when we went, we only went one time. And after that, I must have gone back a second time, because the counselor said to me, you need to let this marriage go. This is not going to work out. And I remember thinking that I was actually really offended. But now looking back at it, I think, oh my goodness, this person had only met us one time. I could see that my ex was not into it, and I was far too into trying to keep us together. I had made that commitment at a marriage, and I just felt like we had to work it out. But so that was probably, it was probably one of those times, since it sticks in my head, that I knew things were going south. Then a couple different times we separated, then got back together. Then he had a year overseas. And so I joined him for part of that year, not the full year. But it was a voluntary thing. He volunteered to go, kind of let's separate but not be honest about it. And that was incredibly hurtful. So we always did really well when we weren't together. I don't know if many military families would say that, but when we weren't together, that was when we realized we missed each other. That was maturity too. So I ended up traveling to where he was stationed, and I was there the last 4 months of his tour, and it became crystal clear to me while I was there. Well, I loved the country I was at. We had a great time traveling. We were very good traveling companions together. Not so good in a marriage together. And I recognized while we were there that this is not good. This is not healthy. There were too many arguments. We did not have physical arguments. He was not abusive in any way, nothing like that. It just was, I was super lonely. And what I realized was I was lonely in the room with the person I should have felt most connected to. And that sucked. Being alone. It's one thing I remember after our divorce, I thought to myself, well, I'm lonely, but that's justified. I'm alone. And I'd rather be lonely that way than lonely sitting next to the person I'm married. And so basically I returned to the States. He returned to the States. We went to our next base that we were assigned to. And I think we were there 2 months, and he filed for divorce at that point. And then I moved back to my hometown and then a few months later to Minnesota.
So how old were you at this point?
Oh my gosh. Would you believe my brother and I moved out of the base housing on my birthday, and I had turned 25.
So you'd been through a lot. You'd already, had this marriage. How are you feeling at this point when you realized this was really done and it was over?
Well, I've told people before, so I work in mental health now, but I've told people before, I've seen that dark tunnel, the dark place where you feel like you can just fall off that cliff and spiral and spiral and spiral. And it was a horrible time. It was absolutely horrible. It was winter for one thing. It was just so challenging to figure out, who was I? If I wasn't this wife and I didn't have this person who thought of me in that romantic, loving way, who was I? And so when I moved back home, I did get my own apartment. I didn't want to live at home after having my own home for, almost 7 years at that point. And I worked 3 jobs, and part of it was keeping my head busy and my heart busy. I remember, thinking to myself, well, maybe if I was pregnant, we would get back together, which was absolutely not possible. But, so your mind goes in a lot of different places, and it was dark. It was really dark. I tried very hard to get exercise and to get enough sleep, but I didn't really have friends in my hometown at that point. I hadn't lived there in a long time. So I think just every day, one foot in front of the other. And I didn't add this, but his family continued to live in my hometown, and so did I, and my parents. And he hadn't told his remaining parent, and so I ran into them, and they were like, "Oh, you guys are in town." I said, "No." And this was, a few months into it, so it was very uncomfortable.
So you were the one that broke the news that you guys were getting a divorce?
Yes, to my father-in-law. Yes, it was lovely.
That was fun.
Although, to his credit, he did not look too surprised. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe he knew a whole lot more than I realized. But, of course, at that time, I had so many doubts. I did not want to be divorced. That I would have stuck that marriage out, I think, for a longer period of time anyway, because I kept believing that we could figure it out. And the reality here was, somebody else pointed this out to me. He divorced me, right? So I couldn't believe how far forward he was in his emotional health at that point. Like, we had to talk to each other on the phone, and, I could hardly form a sentence, and he was on to
He was out. He'd checked out. He was moving on.
He was moving on. And of course he had, because he had spent probably 6 months to a year, or if not longer, really thinking this out. And he had grieved it already, and I had not grieved it yet. And so we were in 2 very, very different places.
That is so important, because when people ask me, how long does it take to recover? And it depends. It depends on who made the decision, or whether you came to it mutually, because it takes that time to reach that decision and process that decision. And typically, it seems like one person is usually the one that has already made that decision and said, I'm done. This is it. I can't do this anymore. And they have already processed, to your point, part of that grief and letting go. And the other person, a lot of times, is sitting there and their world's crumbled, and they're starting from square one. And so you do have to grieve. I tell people all the time that marriage is a death, or sorry, not marriage, but divorce is a death.
Sometimes marriage too, but
yeah, in a way. But divorce is a death. It's the death of your dreams. It's the death of your family. It's the death of, what you thought your life was going to be. And you have to grieve that. Mm-hmm. And it's so important that, you make that distinction, as he'd already done that. And so
He had. I think he'd probably done most of that before I arrived, when we were living overseas. And so I've never thought that he was a bad person or a horrible person. I think we were too young. And, of course, now I have 20-something years to look back on it, but we were far too young, and we held in ourselves these pieces that were good for each other, but they weren't good for each other in a marriage. I could blame it so many different places, right? It's difficult to be married when you're young in a young military family. That's not easy, being military. Now, 20 years have passed, it might be better now. It's not easy to be married to someone who lost a parent in his teens. He was still grieving that. It wasn't easy to be married to me, who had grown up in a very, while loving home. We had very strict rules. And he was not a rules kind of guy. Even though he joined the military, that was just his livelihood. He had this whole other wild side to him, which was super fun. But it was not, I truly believe now I can see this. He, when we got divorced, I really believe he knew he couldn't make a change, not the change that I needed. And there was no point in delaying that and telling me he could make a change. He decided he wasn't going to be able to make those changes. Biggest thing, we were just too young. We should have, I don't regret my relationship with him in any way. If I were going to redo it, I wouldn't have gotten married. I would have just moved, lived with him, had a great time, and left it when it was no longer fun. And that would have been a really good life experience. I'm very grateful we didn't have children together. That would have really complicated things. And when we divorced, we didn't own a home together. We owned cars together. We had a car loan and some normal credit card debt and my student loans. And so literally he filed on online. And it was a very simple divorce. So yeah.
So
The one mistake I made, though, I kept my married name. And about 2 years later, when I moved here, I actually took my stepdad's last name to honor his relationship. And so that's the one thing I would change. I would not have kept that married name.
So you mentioned you were in this dark place, you moved back home, you're running into your in-laws, you working 3 jobs. How did you start to rebuild your life? How did you figure out who you were?
Oh, well, I always had an interest in yoga. That was before yoga was everywhere you looked. And in a town nearby, there was a yoga class that was advertised. And I can't remember what the cost was, but I remember feeling it was significant for me. But I could not get my mind to be still. It was just constantly on him and what am I going to do? And is there a way to get back together? And so I decided to go to this yoga class. And so I went, and I remember feeling like my shoulders were clear up, above my head because of stress. And I can't even remember that yoga instructor's name, but she was so good and so clear in her instruction. And I went once a week. And for that 1 hour, I told myself, I'm not going to think about him. If he enters my mind, I'm going to let it go. And that was life-changing. I have done yoga ever since then. Lots of people talk a lot about all these yoga poses and those are great. But the biggest thing about yoga is the breathing and the quieting our minds. And so that, for me, really took me down a different path.
So, and I believe that you have to find something. You have to find something. And to your point, it's hard not to fixate on your ex and what things were and what could be, what ifs. The what ifs really can weigh on you.
Yeah.
What if this would have happened, or what if I'd done this differently? And what if having that time to clearly be mindful about letting that out of your head probably carried over, obviously, into the rest of your time. I mean, it probably took time. So what did you end up doing? Did you end up staying in your hometown, or you said it's been 20 years. So where are you now? What happened?
So I told you I was working a couple jobs, and I just thought, this is crazy. I have Sunday nights off. What am I doing? I didn't work this hard for this college degree for this. And so my very best friend of 40-something years now, also from my hometown, had fallen. Well, she had fallen for a drummer, actually, who moved to Minnesota. And so she followed him to Minnesota, and she worked in an office where they had an opening for the summer for a receptionist. My degree is in social work. That's what I do. But I thought, what a great way to just have a change. So I loaded up a U-Haul, my 100-pound black Labrador, and drove to Minnesota. And I lived with her for, 3 3.5 years, I think we shared a house. There was a 6-month time period in there where I got my own place because I thought that I should do that. And I actually didn't enjoy it. I was lonely, and we ended up just back in the same house. And I started, I did that job and joined a gym and continued to do yoga, continued to work out and try and focus a little on me. I was trying to think what else I did. I also waitressed now that I think about it. I did a lot of waitressing, but I needed that extra money. Financially things were tight. And so that was, that financial piece is huge when you get divorced. I'm very grateful. My mother gave me this advice when I started college to always be sure you can take care of yourself, to not depend on a man for that money. And so I knew I could, right? So that was how I waitressed, and I ended up doing some, obviously social work jobs, which were not the best paying, but that's how I survived, paid some bills off, paid off my car, so I didn't owe on that anymore. We were not connected. That was actually my ex and I's last connection was the car. They actually sent the title to him, so he had to send the title to me, which was kind of ugly. But that's what I did. I worked and worked and worked. I did not date a lot. I think things may have looked a little differently at one point, but my stepdad who raised us actually died very unexpectedly, less than a year. Less than a year after we divorced. Oddly enough, there was about a 6-week period in there before his death that my ex started calling me, seeing if I was still available. He felt like he'd made a mistake. We never saw each other. It was just over the phone. And I would be lying if I said I didn't very much consider trying it again. And then my dad died. Now, I told you we were both from the same town, so I said, Dad's died. I need you to fly home. And I'll never forget this because this was the end. He said, I don't think I could handle that right now. And I literally hung the phone up, and there was almost like a wall built. I could not grieve two things at once, and I was done with that. Now, that doesn't mean I wasn't sad about it, but I knew I was done. If you cannot be there for me when I've lost this man who raised us, then I'm really done. And I needed to grieve my dad at that point. And so that really was the end. That piece was released. And that's not to say I don't ever, even now, there are moments where I think, oh yeah, it would have been our anniversary today. Or, oh, I see a picture on Facebook and, and his life is good. And I'm so glad because I really wanted that for him. And my life is wonderful and I'm so fortunate for it. So I can, with hindsight, I can say that was a blessing. I'm grateful for those years. I don't know that I would have gotten a college degree, honestly, if I hadn't been married to him because of just the financial pieces. But boy, am I glad we got divorced now. Is that awful?
I don't think that's awful because I think that the whole purpose of this podcast is to share those stories, because when you're in the middle of it, you don't see the blessing of it. As you know, I've been divorced twice, and it took me years to understand what the blessings of those divorces were. You have those experiences in your life, and we can't go back and change the past. But with hindsight and time, we tend to see that helped make us who we were or who we are today. And had we not had those experiences, then we wouldn't be who we are today. And so, looking back and being glad that you had that experience, but also being so glad that you got divorced because your life would not be where it is today. So where are you today? I see you have a wedding ring on.
I do. Yes. So that's what's interesting. I was thinking about this. So when I got married the first time, of course, I was so young, but I knew exactly what I wanted, right? I thought I did. I knew I wanted this particular kind of guy, and adventure came with that marriage, being that he was in the military and travel. And here's what I knew when I started dating the second time around, what I would not tolerate. And there were no options for those things. There were some things in my head that I absolutely would not tolerate. And so If a guy on the first date had 3 drinks instead of 2, I was done. I didn't give excuses for that. I just thought, I don't care if you're nervous. I don't care. No, I'm done. If they were not connected to their family, I was done. Of course, you can be overconnected, but that's a different story. But if they didn't want children, I wasn't interested. And I really watched, so I'm remarried, and my husband treated his mother and my mother as if they were queens. And I do believe that how your spouse treats their parents, not always, but in many instances, will tell you something about how they're going to treat you.
Mm-hmm.
So after I was divorced, moved here, my dad passed. I met my husband on a blind date, believe it or not, which I didn't want to go on. And my girlfriends were like, please go on a date, for God's sake, go on a date. So I did. And he was a dairy farmer with his family, and just really down to earth. The really strange thing about that is the day before my dad died, I called him on the phone. He was having surgery, and I was talking with him about the situation with my ex, and he said to me, you need to find a man who loves the dirt, a farmer, a grounded person. That is the last conversation we had. 7 months later, I went out on this date, and here's a farmer. It's interesting how you're led places. So we, what did we date? I think we dated a year, and then we lived together for 3 years. But the internal clock was ticking with wanting children and a commitment. And I finally just said, listen, I love living with you and everything, and you can have babies till you're, 80, but I can't. So we need to decide it's okay if that's not what you want, but I have to here's the difference. I have to make decisions for me and what I know will bring me joy. And I've always wanted children. So, so when the time was right, he asked me to marry him. I said, yes, we got married. And now I have an almost 18-year-old and a son and a 14-year-old daughter. And I cannot believe that my husband and I made such amazing people. I can't, your mom, our kids are not perfect, but they are the joy of our lives and have given us, a lot of sleepless nights, but they're wonderful. And, and now we're looking at, what does empty nest look like? What is the next 10 years of our lives? And I would have to say being in Minnesota, many people in Minnesota buy a lake place, a cabin on a lake. That's what we do here. And so we've just done that actually a year ago. And that was a dream we had together. We're very different people. He no longer farms, but his dreams of his life consist of a job he doesn't mind going to, and a couple kids, and probably now grandkids when the time is right, and a wife who loves him, and a good meal at the table. He's very uncomplicated when it comes to those things. And I think I'm still quite complicated. But so now we have this cabin together, and our marriage is not perfect, but I'll tell you, it's good. And we're very honest with each other. Again, what I will tolerate, what I will not tolerate. And this time around, I mean it when I say, I'm not going to tolerate that. It isn't, well, I wonder, or nope, it really is this. So we certainly had our bumps and our valleys, right? And our mountains. That's what marriages are like. But he's a good guy. I'm really blessed. I'm very, very fortunate. And I can say this, I would probably not have thought about dating him had I not been married before, because he's not that same excitement, right? And that's what I was looking for, all that excitement and bad boy stuff. He's as far away from a bad boy as you could get. So, but I'll tell you what, he's incredibly loyal, and that matters to me. So,
and I think I agree. I think once you've been through a divorce and you took the time, that's critical, is that you took the time for yourself to figure out who this new Melody was and what she needed in a relationship. And that's so important, because when you take the time to gain that clarity, then you bring about, or you attract the people that you're supposed to have, because you're very clear about what it is that you want and you need. And you guys have been married how long now?
20 years on the 1st of July. Can you
Congratulations.
believe that? 20 years. I would say too that it's okay to have that in-between person. You get divorced, your heart is broken, you feel, I know I felt like there was a giant D on my forehead, and that everybody knew that I had screwed this up, and I felt incredibly unattractive. I look back at that and think, oh my God, I was 25 and 26. What was I talking about? I was young. I didn't have wrinkles. But, and I had that in-between guy or guys, it's not the guy you're going to marry again. Hopefully it's this person that makes you feel attractive again. And I do think there's some worth in that, but there's also some worth in knowing in the back of your mind, this is just the in-between. This is not the permanent, because your heart is not, for most people, not in the place, at least for me, my heart was broken. I was not in a place to have any kind of serious anything. And I'm grateful that somewhere in there I knew that. So
what is the one thing that you could or would tell someone who's going through a divorce right now that you wish you would have known?
That it's going to be okay. That not all marriages are meant to last for forever. I know we believe that. We make those commitments. We're so sure. I'm not convinced that every marriage is supposed to last 50 years. Some of them just don't. You're supposed to gain something from that relationship, learn something, and move on. Easier said than done. The other piece I would definitely say is, instead of just rushing out to find that next person because there's such a hole, you feel, I just felt like there was a giant, massive hole in me. Step back from that edge of that cliff, because we've all seen it and it's ugly. And for me, finding a yoga community was super important. Not for a bunch of wacky stuff, just to breathe and have quiet in my brain. Eat right. None of us want to eat right when we're divorced, right? We were eating popcorn and drinking beer, and avoid that stuff. That's going to create all kinds of other issues you don't need to have. Get outside. Eat right, get enough sleep if you can, hopefully, and know that your life is going to be okay. It's an opportunity really to kind of reinvent yourself, even though it's super hard to see that. There's an opportunity for you to say, okay, this direction. I look back at it now and I think, oh my God, why did I ever think I could be a military wife? I was horrible at that job. I was not good at it. I believe everybody pulls their pants on the same way every morning. And that's a really not a very good view if you're a military spouse. You have to have some respect and understanding of the military I didn't have. And so here was this opportunity to reinvent myself. And I wouldn't say I'm a completely different person, but my life has certainly gone in a different direction than I expected it to. So do these things that pull at you, but you never had time to do. If you want to be a painter, paint. If you want to bike 1,000 miles, bike 1,000 miles, and you'll find this inner self you didn't know you had.
Great advice. Thank you for being willing to share your story with us today. And I know that somebody out there listening can relate, and hopefully it brings her some inspiration and some hope to realize that it is going to be okay, and that you do make it through, and that it's not the end of your life. And I think when you go through a divorce, it's so, you just feel like it's the end. You can't see beyond that. And it is an opportunity. And I love that it's an opportunity. That's what I say all the time. It's your chance to start over. It's a clean slate. Not entirely clean, but you get to make decisions based on you and not someone else. So thank you, Melody. I appreciate you being on the show today. And if you're out there listening and you want more information on how you can get some help moving forward, I have small support groups that I facilitate with women who are going through a divorce and want help getting through to that next step, how they find themselves and how they create new lives they love. I also, as a master certified life coach, do personal one-on-one coaching with women who want extra help moving forward and recovering from divorce and building a new life they love. You can find links to both of those at recoveringcinderella.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Recovering Cinderella. So have a great week, beautiful. And remember, your story didn't end with your divorce. You are still writing it. And the next chapter is going to be even better than the last.